two guests from Friends of Mystery is typically based in Portland, Oregon. Zoom has spread our reach considerably, which has been very fun. Tonight, we've got guests from the other side of the continent in the other arguably original Portland. Chris and Katrina and I have, we like to clash about the various merits of Portland. Of course, I'm in Eugene now, so I don't even count as a Portlander anymore. But they have been very gracious to join us on a late, after dark spring, late winter night to talk about their work. But we've got one other thing that's going to happen before that. One of the things that Friends of Mystery does every year is awards the Spotted Owl Award for Best Northwest Mystery. Those are mysteries that are by writers in the Pacific Northwest. And tonight is the night I'm going to turn this over to Jeanette Voss, who is in charge of the Spotted Owl Committee, who's going to tell us the results of this year's voting. Oh, Jeanette.
Thank you. The winner of the Spotted Owl Award this year is a repeat winner, Robert Dugoni, for The Last Agent. And he was also tied for second place with Michael Neiman because he had two books, A Cold Trail, and Michael Neiman for Percentages of Guilt. Then next, Mike Lawson for House Privilege, Mark Cameron, Stone Cross, Daniel Calla, The Last High, Dana Stabenow, No Fixed Line, Spencer Cope, Shadows of the Dead, El Mar, The Missing Sister, and Mark Cameron for Shadow of the Dragon. So that's
we had a couple of doubles in there.
Yeah. So it was down to the wire. So we've had a bit more challenging year because we can't meet. So being mailed, etc. But we've managed. So hopefully this coming year we can actually meet.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Yes, and we'll get that. That'll be posted on the Friends of Mystery website here very soon. So thank you so much for that. So with that, I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the fine folks sitting there together. So far without any cats, but we're still waiting on that. Fingers crossed. So this is Chris Holm and Katrina Holm. They are a husband and wife duo. Chris writes all kinds of very amazing stuff. Sort of paranormal, supernatural, hitman, thriller. He's amazing and very much somebody to read. And then Katrina is herself a reviewer and writer about mystery. She's written for all kinds of publications from Publishers Weekly and Mystery Scene and Kirkus, and both are talented, thoughtful, and lovely people that if I could have them here in the room with me, I'd give them great big hugs because I just love them to death. So I'm going to turn things over to them. They're going to be in conversation tonight, and then there will be a chance for question and answer as we go along. So Chris and Katrina, please.
Thank you very much. So first off, thanks so much to Bill and Kelly for inviting us.
And thank you everyone else for showing up and hanging out with us. And thank you for the lovely introduction. And Bill, the feeling is mutual. It would be lovely to be there in person.
It would. And in all honesty, it's super cool to get to see a lot of familiar faces and names for those of you who are being sneaky and don't want to put your faces on the screen. So I was thinking about this just the other day. My first mystery conference was 10 years ago. It was VoucherCon 2011 in St. Louis, and Bill sat next to me on the very first panel I ever moderated. I kicked things off. I prepared obsessively for this panel. I had reams of notes, and then I promptly kicked it off by mispronouncing Bill's protagonist's surname, which, if I'm not mistaken, is Kadish. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, excellent. Right. So I do have it now, 10 years later. And then one of the panelists, who'd been a lovely guy in all of my correspondence with him, went completely rogue and started calling on his friends from his group blog that were sitting in the audience. I was completely mortified, but at least it sets the bar for tonight pretty low. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you know, Bill must have forgiven you, because I think when we were in Portland for Left Coast Crime, I don't even know how
I
many
don't even
years
remember
ago it
what
was,
year
but
that was.
Bill and Kelly took us out for beer and showed us around the other Portland. So hopefully we can return the favor at some point and have you.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll have to get you out to Portland Prime at some point.
So as Bill said, I'm Katrina Niidas Holm. I'm married to this guy. I write features and reviews for a number of publications, most recently PW Kirkus, and I'm also the small and independent press reviews columnist for Mystery Scene. I've also contributed to the Los Angeles Review of Books and Criminal Element, and I did a brief stint as the editor and one of the editors and the social media maven of The Life Sentence, which sadly is no more.
And I'm Chris Holm. I'm the award-winning author of the cross-genre collector trilogy, which recasts the battle between heaven and hell as old-fashioned crime pulp. I'm also the author of the Michael Hendricks thrillers, which feature a hitman who only kills other hitmen. And I have a forthcoming scientific thriller coming out from Holm Books, hopefully next year, called Child Zero, which I'm sure I'll talk at least a little bit about later in the evening.
Since a married writer and a critic is somewhat of a novelty, I think, we thought we'd talk a bit about kind of how we got here and what it is we do and how we make it work.
But because we've been together for so long, we actually had no idea what people might want to know about us, because obviously, like, I don't have a lot of questions to ask her that I don't already know the answer to. So we solicited some questions via social media, including from some of the people who I see in the grid here, which we'll pepper in throughout. And
we'll also save some time, as Bill said, for questions at the end, so be thinking. So I guess, contrary to popular opinion, we did not actually meet as existing members of the mystery community. In fact, I'm pretty sure neither of us knew that the other liked to read crime fiction when we met, because we met in college. Neither of us were English majors, so neither of us were doing any pleasure reading at that time. And I think it wasn't until we both graduated and moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, that we kind of had the time to kind of talk about what our hobbies were and what our, you know, extracurricular interests were, and realized that our tastes overlapped. And I could be wrong about this, but I think it wasn't until we went to the Barnes and Noble in Barracks Road, and we went to the same section of the bookstore, and I think we're kind of surprised because I, you know, didn't really know many crime fiction fans growing up.
Yeah. So, you
Yeah,
want to leap in?
why not? Okay, so what made you to decide to try your hand at writing, and what was it like for you to admit to me that you wanted to write a book?
Oh God. So my background is in science. I was pre-med for a good while in college, and then I kind of fell in love with infectious disease research. So I actually thought I was going to be a bug hunter for the CDC.
That was very exciting for
Like,
me.
you know, one of those people who like goes to Zaire to chase down, you know, outbreaks of Ebola, or you know, contact tracing is, I think, a thing a lot of people are now familiar with for the very same reason that we're on Zoom right now. So, you know, writing for me was not really on my radar, and I was serious enough about the science that I got into a PhD program for infectious disease research and tropical medicine. But it turned out it just wasn't for me. I enjoyed the topic very much. I didn't love grad school itself. I was kind of miserable at it, and it was kind of the only thing that I had intended to do. I'm from a practical working class family who loved books and were avid readers, but certainly didn't encourage anything artistic or entertain that idea as a career. So it seemed crazy to me, to the idea that I would ever write a book. So to answer your second question first, what it was like to tell you, you know, I don't want to be glib and say it felt like coming out, but it felt akin to saying, like, you know, I want to go to clown college or something. It was just insane to say that out loud. But what made me want to try my hand at it was a conversation I had with you when, I was in grad school and I was miserable. And you said, if you're not happy, why don't you just quit? And I said, well, I have no idea what I would do if I quit. And she said, well, what's something you've always wanted to do? And I said, I don't know. I've always kind of thought I might write a book one day. And you said, do that. And now we're here. So it's kind of your fault, is what I'm saying. So I have to ask you, like, what went through your head when your science nerd husband, who had never, to your knowledge, written a word of fiction, said, I want to be a novelist? And what was it like when I actually gave you that first thing to read? Do you remember?
I was a little surprised because at that point I had never met anyone who had written a book. They were, authors were kind of like those, like fictional characters themselves.
Yeah.
And also I had no idea it was anything that you were considering. And I'm hopefully that I'm supportive when you said that. But, also in the back of my head, I remember thinking, we lived in this tiny little 1-bedroom apartment, like very, very small, subterranean. There was no room to breathe. And I remember thinking to myself, so what am I supposed to do when he is, writing in silence in the one room of our apartment that is not a bedroom? But I eventually obviously figured that out. We can touch on that a little bit more later. But
Yeah, in fact, let's jump into that then. So, like, how did you get involved in reviewing?
That's actually your fault. I think had just moved to our house after me spending an absolute fortune on books just to fill time while you were writing, which, good way to pass time. But I think you were on Twitter. It was around 2010, back before, Twitter became the place that it is now, back when it was still kind of a little bit more of like a fledgling cocktail vibe. And there was a woman named Beverly Kendall, I think, who was a romance writer who had a review blog. And she was looking to open like kind of a mystery wing of her review blog and was looking for reviewers. And you encouraged me to do it. And I said that was absolutely ridiculous because I had no experience whatsoever.
Excuse me while I stop our cat from chewing on an electrical wire.
And you encouraged me to submit a writing sample, and she took me on, and it was unpaid, but I got free books. But that kind of led to, I think, Criminal Element was just getting started back then, and they were willing to pay me to do some writing, which I thought was super cool. So I did that, and that exposure got me increasingly bigger gigs. And now here, 11 years later, I'm making them, not a living, but a pretty good side hustle at it.
Yeah.
So.
And there are perks, like enough books to like build a whole second house out of, or
I never thought that, like, I'd just be kind of blasé when the UPS man just drops off books at the front door.
Yeah. So I have to ask then, like, who is maybe the most intimidating or biggest person you've had a chance to talk to throughout like your sort of writing career? Do you know?
I don't know, because like, BadgerCon panels I've had some really cool, like Laura Lippman, the panel I moderated with Laura Lippman and Megan Abbott scared the crap out of me.
Well, both of them scare the crap out of me, for the record, as well.
So talented and so gracious, and it was a lot of fun to moderate that panel, but they were terrifying. CJ Box, I thought, was another like big name that also incredibly sweet. Tess Gerritsen was wonderful. Thanks to PW, I've actually had the benefit of talking to a lot of bigger YA authors. I interviewed Tony Adeyemi before she actually hit the Tonight Show. So, I got there first. Maggie Stiefvater, good names. I never did answer your question as to what it was like to read your first book, which you asked, and I completely forgot. That was, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Funny Farm with Chevy Chase, where, they go off to the farm and he writes a book and he slaves away at it and he hands it to his wife and she can't make any sense of it whatsoever. I was a little nervous. That's what it would feel like.
Yeah, I was a little nervous about that too. I remember you were trying to read it at your mom's house, at your parents' house.
Well, because you were watching me read the entire thing. And when you've got a first-time novelist who's actually watching you read their book, like you're the first person who's ever seen their fiction. Why are you laughing? Why did you raise your eyebrow? What's going on? So I had to that was a little nerve wracking. I actually ended up waiting. Finally, we went to go visit my parents 2 hours away from here one weekend, and I waited till he fell asleep. And then I read the last 200 of pages of the book. I stayed up until like 4 o'clock in the morning so I could read it in peace. But thankfully it was good. And I didn't have to like then figure out how to like
Right.
gently crush your dreams.
Well, right, because every writer who goes through this for the first time knows this, right? Is like, I actually said to her, look, I appreciate that you want to support me and say nice things because I've been working on this for like 2 years. But understand, if you tell me this is good, I'm going to start showing other people. So like, so, you know, a kind lie is going to make us both look really dumb eventually, you know. So please be brutally honest. And I don't know if she actually was brutally honest, but you know, but I did all right. We got through it.
Yeah. Has it gotten any easier to turn the book over?
So actually, this gets at Barbara Ross, a terrific writer in her own right, asked us this question on Twitter. She actually asked, does Katrina read Chris's manuscripts or does she have to wait like the rest of us? And the short answer is yes, she does read my manuscripts.
Many times.
Yeah, so I think you're my first reader. Before I even show it to my agent, you get to see it. And in fact, those who know me know that the most recent book I've been working on has taken almost 4 years. It's a book called Child Zero, and it took a long time because it was incredibly ambitious and because it was dear to my heart because it's a scientific thriller, and my background is in science, and I wanted to write something that was a big sweeping thriller in the vein of Michael Crichton, but not in any way cheap on the science. And so for me, it was a painful experience because I really wanted to get everything absolutely right, and I found that crippling. And so for the first time in my career, poor Katrina was subject to like every chapter as I wrote it. I'd be like, you know, does this work? Does this work? So you know, she's been reading. She got to read all the words that were so bad they didn't end up in the final version. But yeah, so she's, you know, everybody says, you know, your spouse or whatever is going to be too nice and you shouldn't listen to anything they say. But mine's a professional critic, so she tends to carry a little more weight, I think, and I lean on her pretty heavily.
Nice about it, I think.
Well, and you've thus far refused a co-writing credit, so you know that's nice of you.
You've gotten better at taking notes, or maybe at least I you know, realize that like you're going to be grumpy about them for the first 24 hours or so, and then
yeah, that's true. And I'm sure other writers who are listening know a thing or two about how they take criticism. It took me a while to learn that. I've learned that every note is the worst note I have ever heard in my life for the first 24 hours after I've been told it. Like I know now not to respond to anything, you know, right away. I try to sleep on it and come at it the next day, because then at least some of the suggestions don't seem stupid to me. I don't know. So I am curious. Michael Strom, hi Michael,
there, yes.
asked on Twitter, and this is a good one for you to tackle, is how easy or hard is it to take your pro hat off and read or watch or listen to something without analyzing? Or is breaking down the story critically part of how you find enjoyment?
I'm way less harsh about anything we watch or read than you are, I think, like for pleasure. Like I'm so happy for when I review for Publishers Weekly and Kirkus, I have to take notes while I'm writing because you have to do page sites to prove that all of the plot stuff you put in the synopsis is actually accurate. And there are copy editors who go in and check to make sure, you know, that this person actually did kill this person on, you know, at this point in the story, and the names are all spelled correctly, and they really do live in California. So I actually do read. Actually, right now all galleys are digital because no one's mailing anything because of the pandemic. But I read with Word open, just taking page site notes for the first like 150 pages. And I am just so happy to sit down and watch something and not have to worry about whether or not I can recap the plot in 150 words, or I don't have to like worry if that character is fully fleshed. I just like kick back and I'm just totally, you know, I buy into everything, and you're always like picking apart at it. And like,
I don't know that I'm picking apart at it. There's just
you pick apart at it.
There's just some things, you know, you're watching TV, there's some things you just think you could write better on occasion. Just saying. You know, which is easy to say, armchair quarterbacking, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else do we have here?
I can go on to Io's question if you'd like.
No, so you started writing on weekends,
Mhm.
and now it's a full-time job, and has been for a few years. Has that approached the way that you write, and has it kind of approached the way you feel about writing in general?
That's an interesting. So I've been thinking about that, and first of all, I think when I started writing, I think this is weird. It's a weird job because it's the only job that I feel like gets harder the better you get at it. I would like to think that I'm a better writer than when I started, and I have a much harder time getting words down. When I was writing my first couple of books, the first one which was unpublished, which remains unpublished, and then Dead Harvest, which was my debut. I really had like no trouble just like clacking away at the keyboard and thinking like, this is genius, and like it wasn't, but it was really nice to kind of write in that, in that delusional bubble. And I feel like the more serious I've gotten about it, the harder I've realized it was. And I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but I feel like I pick up the internal, I pick up the voices of the people who've edited me, so my first agent really didn't do any editing, which was frustrating to me because my first editor also didn't really do any editing, and so I felt like people were just kind of printing my manuscripts, and that's a nice ego stroke at first when they're like, oh yeah, it's great, we're going to the printer with it, but eventually you realize like I'm just not going to get any better, if nobody's going to give me any notes. And so when I went to go find a second agent, I purposely sought out someone who had an editorial background. And my agent David Gerner is a genius editor, and he beats the crap out of me every single time I give him a draft. He's a one more draft guy. It's always just, oh, it just needs one more draft, just a little tightening up, one more draft. And I think for the first book we did together, it was 7 one more drafts.
This last one was only one more draft.
Yeah, the last one was only one more draft. But again, I think I internalized his voice. And so I would write a sentence and I'd hear him being like, really? Like, that's the best you could do on that? Or like, oh, come on, that's a cliche. You got to do better than that. And then, of course, he ended up selling The Killing Kind to Josh Kendall at Mulholland, who's also a very hands-on editor. So I've now internalized all of Josh's ticks and foibles. And so I think, it's gotten a lot harder actually to get words down. I definitely treat it more like a job than I did then. It was a fun hobby when I was starting out. It was sort of an escape from, I did science 9 to 5. And so on the weekends, I wrote about an undead soul collector. It was like a complete change of gears. I love my job. My job's terrific, but I think I angst over it a little more than I used to, because it matters more. I mean, it's part of what keeps the lights on.
And now poor you, where I used to read while you were writing, but now I'm stuck reading I've still got the day job, so I have to do all my reading on weekends and evenings. So he's got to find something else to do.
Well, it gives me
it comes full circle.
It does come full circle. So, Io Anatade wanted to know if you have a preference for the type of books you mainly like to review.
It's interesting because I get zero say in what I review for Kirkus or Publishers Weekly. Like they sign it. If I don't like it, I don't like it. So what? I really do enjoy. I like just about anything. I don't like anything that's just bleak for the sake of bleak. I like reading to be an escape, and for me that doesn't feel like an escape. It just feels like a descent into even darker dark, and that's not fun. I like a lot of domestic suspense. I like a good cozy every now and then. My favorite thing, if an editor asks me what kind of book I want, like what genre I like them to send me the kind of book they don't know how to categorize, like the weird stuff that, where the author's like scribbling in the margins and just kind of writing like they don't care what part of the bookstore it's going to be shelved in. And that has bitten me in the butt. Sometimes I've gotten some just incomprehensible nonsense to review, but I've also found some really wonderful books with that request. And
Yeah, and
I like that.
unfortunately, you're not allowed to talk about most of them
not.
because of NDAs, which kind of
Yeah.
stinks because,
Um,
for example, if some of them had been turned into major motion pictures that were critically acclaimed, you could say like, hey, I got there first, but
I don't get
you're
to
not
talk
allowed
about
to,
it. I know.
which kind of stinks.
Yeah.
So Tim Hennessy, who is an ace critic, editor, and writer himself, wanted you to touch on something that you've mentioned before that I think a lot of people maybe aren't aware of, which is the purpose of the reviews that you write, who they're for, and who they serve. Are they for the general public? Are they targeted to someone else? And I know the answer for you is different depending on the outlet.
It's different, I think, for me anyway. The kind of review that I write and who that review is for and the purpose of that review is different depending on what outlet I'm reviewing for. Apologies if everybody already knows this, but so Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Book List are known as the trades in publishing. And basically it's because it's for the industry. Those reviews are they're for libraries, they're for bookstores, they're for media scouts who are looking to buy rights, that sort of thing. And they don't have a lot of time to look through endless catalogs. So they get the trade reviews, which come out usually, let's see, I think people are publishing June reviews right now. So a few months ahead of time. And it helps them kind of digest reviews that are about usually around 200 words. And that includes like the title and the author and the name of the translator and the ISBN, everything.
Right. So here, if I can just interject, is a tiny pro tip for writers. If you want a more detailed review, short title. It counts in the damn word count in the trades. It's unbelievable.
True. If you've got a really long title, a really long name, a co-author, a translator, I mean, that eats into your word count, and they are brutal about it. But so if you ever look at a Publishers Weekly or a Kirkus review and you wonder, like, God, why is this like 2/3 plot and then just like one sentence? That is the whole point of the Publishers Weekly review. It's so that, someone who's trying to decide what titles they're going to buy can look at the review, know exactly what kind of book it is, what the plot is without any major spoilers, hopefully, how it stacks up against other books of that kind, and then like 1-2 sentences if you're lucky and have a short title of kind of like a critical evaluation of the book. There's usually what we like to call an evaluative adjective in the first title. So if you ever noticed, like, the
first sentence, last sentence, essentially, right?
Yep. So those are a unique kind of type of review in and of themselves. PW is, I think, a little bit more genteel than Kirkus. Kirkus is very happy for you just to kind of encourage candor, maybe I should say. I think authors will just say that they're mean, but I think so those are what the trades are. I don't get to pick, as I said, what I review.
And you don't have your name on those reviews.
My name is not on the review. It is technically the opinion of
right.
whatever I'm reviewing for. And I try, not to attack authors. You don't really get into that sort of thing. No personal feelings involved. But when I review for Mystery Scene, I only review books that I like. I do get to pick what I cover. And I think for those reviews, my rule is more of like a champion and to kind of help that title, especially because they're all small press titles, kind of cut through the noise and hopefully, find an audience. Hi, baby.
This is Moxie, by the way. Her brother Dashiell is around somewhere, but he's a little shyer. So
yeah. So there, I hopefully that answers your question without me rambling too much.
Yeah, I mean, I found it fascinating because I guess I didn't realize, writers always have this tough time sort of digesting trade reviews. And the fact is they're not for us and they're not for readers. They're for booksellers, they're for librarians,
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A lot of authors really angst about getting a bad trade review, but I gotta tell you, I mean, subscriptions to Kirkus and Publishers Weekly are very expensive, and chances are good that your mailman is not going to have a subscription to Publishers Weekly. They're not going to know if you got a bad review. If you got one, just shut up about it and no one will ever know. I promise you.
Yeah, I think
Um,
I think that's actually kind of true. Is
Yeah.
you know, if nobody mentions your your Kirkus review,
Yeah.
then no one's gonna have any idea. It's not like people peruse Kirkus.
I mean, you might have a mean friend who's just looking for.
Oh yeah, no, bad reviews find you quickly. There's always somebody.
Yeah.
That somebody may actually, you know, be listening in right now. I don't know. But okay, so say I'm an author who wants to get a book into your hands. What's a good way to go about doing that?
Well, if you're looking to get into Kirkus or Publishers Weekly, don't talk to me because, as I said, I've got absolutely no control over that. But if you are a smaller independent press author, I'd say probably the best way is to actually just ask your publisher to reach out to me. I've got a really good relationship with most of the, editors and PR people there. I'm always happy to get a book to look it over. If that's not an option for you, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, as long as you're nice about it and don't hound me.
So what's the worst way to get a book in your hands?
Don't hand me a copy of your book in the bathroom. I've had that happen so many times at like FetcherCon and stuff like that, and it's a really awkward encounter. So just be cool about it. But I really am always looking for, like, actively looking for new books to review for Mystery Scene. Right now I'm looking for books that are published in, I think, July, August, September, for a column that's due in June. So if anybody out there has a smaller independent press book, if you're looking for coverage, yeah.
Diversity very much encouraged.
Yes, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
what to do. All right, so there are some questions specifically to you that we got. And the first one I've got is actually from Zachariah Johnson, who's right there.
Oh, you're going to the Twitter. She's
Going to
actually
the
pulling
Twitter.
out her phone. This was a late entrance.
Yes,
So
we just got this, and he asked, what's the line between hero, anti-hero, villain? Michael Hendricks, who is the protagonist of the Killing Kind of Abraham, toes the line. What happens when the anti-hero crosses it? Is there coming back?
I love this question, and I love this question because I don't know the answer to it. To me, I think when I started out writing, one of my questions that I was fascinated by as a lapsed Catholic is, I was fascinated as a kid by the idea that you can be a good person in life, and yet if you violate, some rule or another from this, arcane book that's been translated down the generations, and that people hotly debate the meaning of, today, if you violate one of these rules, you can still go to hell. And that really freaked me out as a little kid. This idea that if you didn't follow the rule book, a good person could end up in a bad place. So that was always something that really fascinated me. And so in that series, my main character makes a deal with a demon to save his dying wife. He's a good guy, but he ends up condemned to hell. And so that was interesting to me. Good people doing bad things. And then the further I got into that, the more I became interested in the question that I think I started writing Michael Hendricks to answer, which is, how bad can a person be and still come back? Because Michael Hendricks is an interesting character. He grew up rough in the foster system. He enlisted young, discovered that he had a penchant for killing, but maybe not the stomach for it. And when he comes back from overseas, he comes back kind of broken and damaged, and decides he wants to sort of atone for his sins. But the way he goes about doing it, he only really knows violence. So the way that he goes about doing it is killing other killers. And I found that fascinating because I kind of thought of it as sort of an anti-Jack Bauer from 24. Because Jack Bauer is, supposedly the hero of the show, and he does some terrible things throughout the course of 24. At one point, he actually he brings a guy in ostensibly for an interrogation, but then he shoots the guy and cuts his head off to present to another criminal to prove that he's actually this bad man. How can a hero do that and still be called a hero? I guess, I don't really know. I don't know a lot of heroes, pure heroes, and I don't know a lot of pure villains, because they're archetypes, they're not people. And furthermore, I'm not sure that they'd be that interesting to write about. I always admire writers who can take somebody who's very purely heroic and make them interesting. Superman's a great example. Superman's purely heroic, and plenty of writers have done a terrific job of making him an interesting character, and plenty of writers have done an absolutely terrible job at it. Most of us exist in that gray area in the middle. And I'm not sure when you cross the line from hero to anti-hero to villain. But what I suspect is that a lot of people cross those lines a lot of times throughout the course of their lives. And that's something that really interests me. And I think it's like long division. I feel like I'm writing that series specifically to answer that question, and I'm not sure what the answer is yet. I'll know when I get there or don't.
Do you think you play with that? I mean, your first two series, I think, were a lot kind of about that, like how far you can go and come back. Do you see any part of that in the newer book, or do you think you kind of drifted away from that?
So Child Zero is a bit different in a couple of respects. Again, it's a scientific thriller. And I suppose I'll skip ahead to your, anything you can tell us about it sort of thing, because it's hard to answer that question without telling you a little about it. So what the book is about is it takes place. I actually have been, like I said, writing this for so long that I actually finished my first draft of it after about 3.5 years, right before COVID-19. Which was either great timing or terrible timing, I'm not sure, because it's essentially a plague story. It's a story that takes place in a near future in a world that's reeling from the collapse of the antibiotic era. A lot of you probably know that we're seeing a lot of antibiotic resistant bacteria in the world these days. But what you probably don't know is sort of the method by which that happens. And it's really wild. And to really boil it way down, there's this thing called horizontal gene transfer. And it's kind of like how bees can cross-pollinate different species of flowers. There are viruses that affect bacteria. And when they infect a bacteria, they actually suck out its genetic material. And when they go and reinfect something else, they'll inject that genetic material into a different bacterium. And through that method, any bacteria that bumps into an antibiotic and survives can teach just about any other bacteria on the planet how to do the same. And so it's a really spooky thing, but basically, antibiotic resistance is contagious. And there's a good chance that our antibiotics will be completely overrun if we don't do something about it. And that's a very real problem that is definitely on the horizon. And so I had this idea of what would a world look like in an absence of antibiotics? And you'd be looking at a world in which surgery was no longer possible, in which chemotherapy was no longer on the table because it's immunosuppressive, in which a splinter or a hangnail could kill you, and that's a genuinely frightening thing. So I had this idea of, in a world like that, what lengths would people go to get their hands on the next great cure, the next antibiotic, basically? And that was sort of the premise of the story. And what's interesting is I actually don't think there are a lot of straight up bad people in that story. There are some, but I actually think it's a lot of desperate people, a lot of people who think that they're doing the right thing and kind of have very different ideas about what the right thing looks like. So, yeah.
All right. And Heidi Nichols wants to know, how often do you know how a book or story is going to end before you begin writing it? And how often do you change your mind about how the book or story is going to end?
The short answer is I always know how a book or story is going to end. And I don't think I have ever changed my mind, ever, in all of my books. Maybe a couple of short stories the endings have changed.
Do you just not start writing before you know the ending?
Yeah,
or do you know the ending first? Like first?
I think that's a great question. I'm not sure if I think it tends to come to me all at once, in the sense that when I'm writing a novel, I usually know the opening, the ending, and a few of the major beats in the middle. and I just sort of write to connect the dots. With a short story, I usually know every beat going in, or I wouldn't start writing it. But I don't think I've ever changed the ending of a. It's not. I'm not one of those people who doesn't know who did the murder or something. If I set out to write something, I always know.
I kind of feel like you can tell when someone does that. I mean,
You say that, but I've heard a lot of people who just go by the seat of their pants, and then you'll hear a reader say, "I knew all along who it was," and I always want to be like, "No, you didn't, because the author didn't even know. How could you have possibly guessed?" But
all right.
anyways.
And Peter Nichols wants to know if you hide any secrets in your books that only a few will find.
Yeah, I think everyone probably does.
You do it a lot.
I do it a lot, and one of the reasons why is I'm terrible at naming my characters, and so I'll usually come up with like a goofy theme to name all my characters. In The Killing Kind, most of the characters who I couldn't come up with names for are the real names of punk musicians who use stage names. And so yeah, that was like, I've got a Charlie Thompson, who is Frank Black's real name. I've got Henry Garfield is Hank Rollins. I did not manage to incorporate a Declan McManus, which is Elvis Costello's real name, but I did in that book. I had this one hitman who was this burly guy with a big mustache, and he wore flannel and and work boots, and I named him Leon Wood in honor of the LL of LL Bean, just because it amused me. I just thought it was funny. And what's really funny about that was a writerly friend was reading an arc of the book.
Like the book was like headed to.
Yeah, it was like a month from publication, and I got a frenzied email saying, LL Bean is going to sue you into oblivion for this. You have to stop the publication of this book and change that name. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. And then
got in your head.
Yeah, and then like she kept emailing and got in my head about it. And finally I emailed my editor and I was like, look, I know this is crazy, but should we like hit the big red button and stop the book because LL Bean is going to sue me over this? And he was like, no, that's crazy. And actually, LL Bean recently found out that I did that because we talked about it on Twitter, me and their checkmarked account, and they seemed delighted by it. So I guess they don't mind that I turned their founder into a killer, which is nice. So yeah.
All right, I've got, let's see, one last question for you, and that would be, this is a question I always ask on the panels that I moderate, and that is, if you could recommend one book to someone of yours, to someone who has never read you, what would it be?
Well, since this is an easy one for me, because my first series, the collector series, is out of print currently, which is a bummer, but kind of takes it off the table. And Child Zero doesn't even have a release date yet. So I would have to go with The Killing Kind, which is the first in the Michael Hendricks series. It was a New York Times editor's choice. It won the Anthony Award in 2016 for Best Novel. I would like to point out, beating Louise Penny. She did, however, beat me 2 other times. So, but yeah.
You share an agent.
So. Yeah, and now we share an agent. So we're practically best friends now, is what I would like to think, even though she probably doesn't actually remember having met me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's probably the one that I would recommend. It's a good start, and people seem to like it.
Okay.
So my question to you, I know, thanks to NDAs and stuff, you can't talk about a lot of the major publication stuff that you review. But since your name is already on your mystery scene article, you can probably give some small press recommendations. Do you have any recent favorites that you'd like to tell people?
Yeah, I can do that. So there is a book called Tricky by a writer named Josh Stallings. He's a California writer. Just came out on Polis, however they pronounce that. And it's a really lovely book. I mean, it's in its bones, it's an LA cop story, but it's so much more than that. Josh actually has, I don't know if his son actually has Down syndrome, I can't remember, but he basically writes a cop who encounters a suspect who used to be like a hardened criminal, and was beaten badly and is now severely intellectually disabled. And he handles the story just with such amazing insight and grace, and it's just exciting and it's beautiful and it's just really, really well written. There's a book called Northern Heist by an Irish author named Richard O'Rawe, R-A-W-E. I think it comes out like in a week or so. It's very soon. And it's fascinating because the author is a convicted IRA bank robber. And it is a bank heist novel that is inspired by a real life unsolved bank robbery that was like, the theft of like 77 million pounds from a bank. And it's lean and it's riveting and it's really authentic because he knows what he's talking about. And then there's one more that's, if you like stuff that's a little weird, there's a book called A Certain Hunger by a woman named Chelsea Summers, I believe. That's written in the guise of a memoir of a female food writer who is also a cannibal. And it's just really beautifully written. I mean, it's obviously she was like the character was just a really passionate, very successful food critic. And she writes about everything in that kind of like swoony, hyper-colored prose, including like the love with which she eats her victims. So it's a little bit weird. It's not for the squeamish, but it's just it's a fun,
like
an offbeat read.
Like a feminist response to Silence of the Lambs
Yes,
kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. So if you find yourself in a reading rut, that will smash you clean out of it. So that's
or horrify you clean out of it, depending.
It's not. She doesn't really get. I mean, it's written tongue in cheek. Seems like a really bad thing to say. But it's written definitely with a sense of humor, but it's just really, it feels weird to say it's beautifully written, but it's beautifully written. And there's actually, I was worried it would be like too glib, but there's actually a surprising heart. I shouldn't say that either. But it does. There's just like it kind of, there's a moment of catharsis at the end that's really moving and was very surprising to me. So
Yeah, awesome.
That's what I got for you.
So I think that wraps up the questions we had for each other. If you guys would like to, if anybody has any questions that they would like to chime in, I know we need to do some unmuting or what have you, but.
Here, I will just alert you to a couple that came up in chat.
Yes.
You know,
Please do,
folks
yeah.
are, yeah. So John McGoran, the inestimable John McGoran, asks Katrina, do you ever think about pull quotes when you're writing your reviews?
When I'm writing Kirkus reviews, definitely. It's a little bit harder. PW is not as supportive of you kind of injecting your own style into stuff. Like I've occasionally tried to use words that I find really, charming, that they have been like, no. Kirkus definitely is just willing to let you kind of inject your own style into it. And also because their structure is basically, they've got like a sentence up top that is a little bit about the plot, and then like the middle part of the review, and then that last sentence, which is frequently used as a pull quote, and it has to be like less than some ridiculous number of characters. It has to be really short. And I have gotten some of my last sentences in the front cover of books, so I definitely do think about that.
Well, and I think I've noticed that you put a lot more effort into like you want a great turn of the phrase when you love the book. Yep. Like when you just adored the book, you're like, okay, I've got like 3 or 4 words to try and sneak into this to really give people an impression of how much I loved it. And so you'll agonize over those when you adored a book.
Plus, I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there that are just in it to ruin an author's day, but most of my best friends are authors. I'm married to one. I see how much like pain goes into writing these books and how long it takes. And just to kind of dismiss it, like with a turn of the phrase, just seems.
I mean, to be clear, it's not exactly breaking rocks, but yeah, we definitely agonize over this stuff. But
like, I don't want to see an author like read my review and just be destroyed by it. I'd much rather just kind of like casually slide through their Twitter feed and like see them just like get their first star and I'm the one who gave it to them, and it just makes me so happy. Like that's a really wonderful feeling. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, so another question from Zachariah Johnson, also for Katrina. Do you review anthologies of multiple authors?
I am not allowed to do that. Mystery Scene has some, like, they let me pick what I want within reason. It can't be too large of an independent press, whatever that means. I can't do anthologies because there is an anthologies column that covers that, and I'm not allowed to do true crime. I can't do E only. I can do E first, but not E only. I think that's it. But no, I don't get to do anthologies.
Well, so I actually have two questions that I want to throw out to you. One of them's more broad, and the other one's very specific to this moment. And I'll start with that one. I'm just really interested in that piece of artwork behind you.
Yes,
It looks like an old library card,
It
and
is.
I wanted you to talk
Exactly.
about that a little bit.
so there's a website called Society 6 that kind of,
Mhm.
you probably know.
I have towels from Society 6.
And we didn't realize that they actually do art as well. And there's one, I'm gonna find it. It's something about
So,
like a
yeah, so the idea behind the
sketch
website, for those who don't know, is that it's a platform so that people can upload their own artwork, and then you can buy it in a bunch of different formats. I mean, you can get it on everything from iPhone cases to canvases to, in this case, it's actually a 9-paneled sort of plywood reproduction of this photographer's.
It's from the Ilium Public Library, wherever that is, but it's an actual public library card. And they had a whole selection of them. The actual shop on Society 6 is called Gas Station Burrito. But they've got an entire range of them in different colors, different formats. This one's on wood, but they have it on, you can get posters, you can get them on like metal. It's really cool.
Yeah, that is very cool.
Yeah,
So my second question then, it's more general, and we kind of touched upon this a little bit partly in what you're talking, but I'm just wondering how the last year has, if at all, affected your consumption, what you're interested in, and how you respond to things in terms of your reading, writing, and maybe watching, crime and etc.
Wow. Well, from my perspective, so I dedicated 4 years of my life to writing a book that painstakingly, from a background of somebody who's studied infectious disease research, that painstakingly predicted about 90% of the stuff that just happened. So now it's going to end up looking kind of like a bit of a response. But I actually did finish the bulk of the book before this happened, and have been editing it since. And what I will say is, from my background as a scientist, when I was in my PhD program, in my brief disastrous grad school tenure, infectious disease people are a little different from normal people. We used to have a weekly lunch meeting on Fridays where we would get pizza and go through the CDC's weekly morbidity and mortality report, which is usually, they put out a publication, but they also send, like a full color slideshow. So we're seeing some pretty gnarly stuff while we're like wolfing down our pizza. So for me, I guess I didn't experience sort of the trauma that I'd written in my book with some of the more graphic stuff, the same way as a couple of my early readers. But I can tell you, when I sent it to my agent, he said, "This is terrific, but you need to cut out some of the gore." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "This passage, this passage, this passage." And I was like, "Oh yeah, no, you're right. That's kind of gross." But he was like, "We just need to let the light in a little more." And so it was interesting because I think that's the first time I've ever had an editor of any kind suggest I go less dark. So from my point of view, and I think it was right. It was right for the tone of the book. It's actually a fairly hopeful book. In a lot of ways, it's a very hopeful book. But he was like, given the trauma everybody's been through, you need to ease up just a little bit on that. So from a writing perspective, I think it was an interesting lesson to kind of learn how to let the light back in.
Yeah.
And for you, I mean, has it changed how you approach books for review?
I mean, I don't really think it has too much. I think I haven't seen oddly as many big books move across my desk. Like usually there's a fairly kind of predictable schedule where you see the really big blockbusters like at certain times a year. And I haven't seen as many of the expected names. I don't know if maybe the pandemic is kind of slowing everything down or maybe just slowing certain people down. But I do think that it is changed a bit, the kind of books that I've seen.
That's interesting.
Let's see.
Well, and I got a good sort of bird's eye view of a portion of the genre last year. I actually was not in control of my own reading last year because I had volunteered to judge for an award. So I was basically getting a giant pile of books, you know, in my category. And that was actually great because it forced me to sort of like, you know, sometimes I think, you know, it's like when you're in a bad mood and you listen to sad music and you end up in a worse mood. Like, I'm not sure I should have been the one picking the books I was reading when we were at the height of the pandemic. So it was kind of nice to have this constant influx of new stuff to check out. It was a marvelous distraction, even though I'm not technically allowed to talk about what I thought about any of those books.
I will say, so I also review, in addition to crime fiction, I review YA for Publishers Weekly, like quite a bit of it. And I do have a little more say in the kinds of books I read for them. And I did find myself for a while, like I was getting a lot of the really big, thick, like warrior princess magical battle kind of stuff, and I just couldn't do it. Like there was a lot of just very oppressive like overtones about throwing off fascism, and it was all a little bit too close to reality. So I started requesting a lot more horror, which somehow, and I think it's the same thing with the reason people watch horror movies is that, you know, it's a controlled burn. It's a scare that, like, you know, the bad guy is always vanquished. It's usually a strong young woman who does it. Like you admit there are monsters, but you admit they can be vanquished. And they also usually tend to be shorter and move faster. So I think that's one way that it did kind of affect my appetite. But I didn't realize it until after I'd come out the other side. But
that's interesting. I have never been a horror person until the last year, and I actually started probably for the first time really, you know, seeking it out.
Yeah.
And I think you make a really good point about, you know, you're controlling the monster.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting. Well, so does anybody else have any questions? We've got time here, and if you want to unmute yourself and just start talking, that's okay.
Any questions for Moxie? You know,
Moxie, you know, Moxie, I took a screen capture of Moxie.
They've got way more Instagram followers than we do, like combined.
Oh yeah. No, I love Moxie and Dashel on Instagram.
You want to say hi to everybody?
Kitty. Well, I tell you what, I mean, this has been wonderful. I thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's I think it's been a real treat.
It was absolutely our pleasure, and we're happy to do it.
And we kept you up kind of late back there, and you know, the other time zone that has a Portland. Portland Prime, as you like to call it. I'm fine with that. You know, our Portland has been in the news a lot lately, and not a good way. So I'm more than happy to let you guys be the Portland for now.
And happily so. Although I'll say this, we were all ready to have a chip on our shoulders about your Portland, because it is the more famous of the Portlands. It's the larger of the Portlands. It's the one people think about first, when in fact ours was the original, you know, Portland. But then we got out there for Left Coast, and you know, what a terrific town. We had a blast.
Yeah, it really
I
is.
feel like we need a Portland to Portland like high-speed rail, you know.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But thanks everyone.
Yes,
for
thank you so much for
Yes.
spending your evening with us. We really
Hanging out and
appreciate it.
listening.
Thank you. And so I just want to remind everybody before we sign off here is our final Bloody Thursday of the 2020-2021 season, where there's a lot of 20s in our lives now, will be on March 27th or May 27th. Today's
May
March.
27th.
May 27th. And it will be Kara Black, author of the Amy Leduc mystery series, set mostly in Paris. She kind of bounces around France from time to time, but wonderful writer. And she was supposed to be our guest last May, but of course, things went sideways, and it took us a little while to sort of realize that Zoom was going to become kind of the new reality for a little while. So she will be joining us on Zoom on May 27th. Anybody who is a subscriber to our newsletter will get information about that. You can also look that it'll be posted on Eventbrite under the Friends of a Mystery account. And so you don't have to sign up for the newsletter. You can find it that way. Or you can also look at friendsofmystery.org, and information will be posted about that, a few weeks in advance of the event. So Kara's a delight. She's a sweet lady, and I'm, really looking forward to seeing her in May. So thank you very much, everybody. Is there anything else before we, I don't want anybody to feel like they didn't get a chance, but otherwise we can call it a night.
Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Thanks so
All right.
much, everybody. This was a blast.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
Waiting to see there's still
I
3
know.
people.
Yeah, watching the last couple of people sign off.
Right. So I always like to let people sign off versus like kicking them off. But
Right.
and now it's just David. So now now
Goodbye,
I can say
David.
anything. Oh, it will stop the recording.